It's not my goal to give a perfunctory speech today. Hopefully it will not be. As an introduction, I would like to acknowledge Dina, who is not here today, but gave a wonderful, thought-provoking speech last week. I spent some time talking with her afterwards. Something about what she said, her superb listening skills, prompted me to reach inside a musty closet of mine to pick up an old speech idea I had, dust it off, and present it today. Therefore, Dina, wherever you are, thank you so much for your wonderful listening skills. Earlier this week, I was at a suburban Toastmaster meeting where another member gave this quote: "Worry is interest paid on trouble before it's due." Worry is interest paid on trouble before it's due. In October 2015, I had plenty to be worried about. My husband of then approximately 27 years had been just officially diagnosed by the Mayo with a very serious, almost always fatal blood disorder called cardiac amyloidosis. He had the worst version possible. In a nutshell, the disease causes abnormal proteins to proliferate in your bloodstream, deposit in organs, and cause organ failure. He had the disease in his lungs, his intestines, and his heart. He passed away this past January and lived miraculously a total of 6 years after his diagnosis, which is almost unheard of. It was due to an immunotherapy that the Mayo tried on him, and it worked. He was an outlier. There are really no other ways to describe how he lived that long. The question is, when we go through these life crises, what keeps us from caving in? What keeps us intact? And what enables us to encapsulate this in a 10 to 12 minute speech on a Thursday morning? It's impossible, but I will start with a bookend for my presentation. About 2 weeks after he was diagnosed, just to back up a little bit, literally within days of being diagnosed, I just saw his health tank. He developed heart failure. He was just rapidly degenerating. And the trips to chemotherapy and emergency rooms began pretty soon after his diagnosis. I was exhausted. I was full of anxiety. One morning, though, however, before I woke up, you know, when you're in that state where you're kind of in a dreamlike state, definitely not awake, but you're in this in-between stage. I had this picture, if you will, in my mind of God, although God was represented by this giant being wearing this flannel plaid shirt, like what a lumberjack would wear. He was talking to me. I didn't see his face. I didn't see his head. I just knew he was sitting there talking to me. He was holding in his index finger a tiny little sewing thimble. He looked right at me and he said, "Do you see this?" And he scooped some air in the thimble. And he said, "This represents your past, everything that you cherish and everything that you regret." He tucked it inside his front pocket. Then he took the thimble again and he said, "Do you see this? This represents your present anxiety that engulfs you." He scooped it, put it inside his pocket. Then he took the thimble again and scooped some more air and said, "Do you see this? This is the future that you dread." And he safely put it and tucked it inside his front pocket. Then he sat back rather confidently, looked right at me and said, "Now, what else would you like me to do for you?" I woke up right after that, feeling like the mere mortal that I am, that I somehow had gotten a glimpse of the grandeur of God. And I was able to apprehend in my human finite way the fact that my past, my present, and my future, which to me defines who a person is, represented yet the tiniest infinitesimal dynamic of who God is. My present, my past, my future fit in the corner of his front pocket. And even more so, it was all within his safekeeping. It was as if he was saying, Your past, your present, your future. I've got it. It's right here. It's right in my pocket. I have not forgotten about you. This gave me temporary comfort, but being the human being that I am and being very flustered, I of course forgot about this for years. I mean, I didn't remember this until maybe, I don't know, a couple weeks ago. It gave me temporary comfort, but yet my troubles were far, far from being over. By spring of 2017, my husband and I accidentally relocated to the Mayo. We drove him in the middle of the night because he wasn't getting the care that he needed in Cincinnati. He had a lung infection. They essentially were leaving him to die. I hate to say that, but that is true. My son and I drove him in the middle of the night. He had a lung infection that lasted 8 weeks. He lived through it miraculously, but we somehow landed in an apartment with very, very little effort. Amidst all this taking care of him and him being in the cardiologist's office more often than not, I got a call from my daughter, and this would be another speech, so I'll just say it in a couple sentences. She was 24 years old at the time, married, a wonderful teacher of children with special needs. She and her husband had a beautiful 8.5-month-old baby. She called me to tell me that she had just been diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. She was gone in 2 months. In 2 months, she was gone. My only daughter. The question remains, how do we get through these crises without despairing? As I said, sometimes God gives us impressions of the fact that he's taking care of us. In our case, he put wonderful people in our path, not just friends from Cincinnati, but the doctors here really, really cared and really knew what they were doing, even though this disease was very, very mysterious. Friends that I have not yet met and will not meet until the other side of the grave were praying for us. We had all these prayer chains going, and Toastmasters, very much so, suburban, Southern Minnesota mentors and Chamber Toastmasters, I feel was very formational for me when I was going through all of these crises. But on a very practical level, something I realized is that when we're going through crises, we human beings are like rubber bands. We are far more adaptable than we realize. Oftentimes we don't realize that we are like rubber bands until we are stretched to the point where we almost snap. But this really, truly is the case. Case in point, let me back up. I had a friend who, I don't know if she was a friend or not looking back. This was over 20 or 25 years ago when my husband and I were moving from our starter home to a larger home. We had 3 children at that point. And I remember saying to her, you know, I feel really anxious about moving into this, making this move. I don't know why, but I'm just full of anxiety. And she said, do you know why that is, Ann? I'll tell you. I said, why? Why am I so anxious? She said, because you don't adapt well to change. You just don't do well with change at all. Unfortunately, for years, I walked around carrying that self-concept. Oh, I don't adapt well to change. I'm not like everybody else. I guess I just can't handle life crises. Until about a year ago, I remembered that and I thought, it's not true. Absolutely not true. I was stretched. I was forced to change, didn't choose to go through what I went through, but I did change. I wasted a lot of time carrying around that lie. We are very adaptable. If you really want to explore that idea, quick plug for a book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, a psychoanalyst who at the age of 24 was imprisoned along with his pregnant wife. She was pregnant, 6 months pregnant, and both of his parents in one of the concentration camps in Germany. He never saw any of his family again. And at the age of 24, he used his college degree. He counseled other inmates who were emaciated, dying of cholera and suicidal, and kept them from committing suicide by helping them find meaning in their life. That's the focus of a book, and I do hope that you get to read it. As the second bookend, so to speak, for my speech, about 3 years ago, after all of this happened, maybe more recently, I had another picture in my mind before I woke up one morning, and it was someone holding a shallow pan of water and just pulling their index finger through it. And I could see the finger go down the pan of water and displacing the water, and then the finger was just pulled up. And I felt as if God was telling me that that pan of water, that water represents your life experiences. The finger represents you. You're being pulled through all these experiences, but you're going through it. You're passing through it. It's being displaced. It's behind you, but yet you remain intact. You are more than your experiences. I realized that Mr. Rogers really was true, that children's show, when he used to say to children, you are more than your anger. You are more than your emotions. And it's really true. I can't really quite explain it, but I believe we are more than our experiences, which for me is a very liberating fact, that we can go through tremendous things and they seem to define us at the moment, but they really are not who we are. I believe in the end, we all belong to God. As a conclusion, I will quote someone we all know, Mother Teresa, who, as we know, encountered death every day. That was her life calling, was to comfort people who were dying, to hold their heads in her hands as she pronounced final words of blessing on them. People who were homeless, people with leprosy, people with no life insurance, no friends, no skills, total outcasts of society. She saw it all. But she did say at one point in her career, and this is a paraphrase, never, ever, under any circumstance, let anyone or anything take your joy away from you. Do not let anyone or anything take your joy away from you. I believe that's really true. I believe that we can experience joy in the darkest moments of our lives, because they are not coming from our experience. They're coming somehow directly or indirectly from God himself. Thank you, fellow Toastmasters.